Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Adam Steele for Hop Pole Studios, and today we are going to be doing a video all about bass, specifically le bass, specifically this, in amongst the whiskey and the other pedal at the back, which you will hear from me about later on. We are looking at the 2 notes le bass preamp today, and it can take your bass tone from this to this. Okay, well, that may have been slightly less overwhelming than I was hoping for, but let's talk about what this thing can do, because this, as you can see, I'm not using a laptop or anything today. This is completely in the hardware world. So today's live broadcast is brought to you by the letter bass. So you can use this pedal as a preamp. You can use it as a distortion box. You can use it any which way you desire. But one thing I'm going to do first of all is you can just about see off camera my trusty jazz bass, and this has some nice active electronics, but with everything set to 12 o'clock, so nothing boosted or cut or anything. I'm just going to turn my mic off and play you what that sounds like on its own. So, typical jazz bass kind of sound, right? So, I'm going to go from that, and now we're going to switch on channel A of le bass. And this is a clean, well, can be clean preamp, which I currently have all the settings set pretty much. Turn off my bass noise. So, if you can see that, channel A is these 4. Let's get that to focus. So, that's currently pretty much 12 o'clock. So let's roll that bass back to 12 o'clock. There was a subtle change. And I'll click this on. As you can see, today is brought to you by Jack Daniels and 2 Notes, who videos are in the works for an extended set of videos with those guys. But for now, this is not one of those. This is one I'm doing off my own back just to give the le bass a demo. So, without further ado, I'm going to play a little bit clean and then turn on channel A. So hopefully you'll already be able to hear that it's clearer, it's got kind of a nicer top end, a fatter bottom end, it doesn't have that chestiness in the mids. And that's just the clean channel. So, there's a massive range of what you can do with this. So, I'll play with the bass and treble first, the obvious stuff. Something that's interesting to note is as that got brighter there, it didn't necessarily sound like nasty, because I think the EQ controls on this go before this tube. A lot of pedals that you see that have a 12AX7 valve in them, they're using that kind of, they're cheating essentially. It's there for show. They've got what you might call starved voltage, that the insides of a 12AX7 tube is supposed to run at hundreds of volts, like seriously high voltage. And that's what they've done here. What you can do is you can run 12 volts through it and you can pretend that the valve's actually doing something to the tone, but it really is helping here. But there's a lot going on this. It's not just a distortion box with some knobs. Well, let's talk about that next, because A is clean, B is distortion, and then you can do clever things if you press both buttons at the same time. But let's look at this distortion. So let's go from channel A, and I'll switch into channel B, and you'll hear how it's much higher gain. Let's just 12 o'clock everything again. So you can really get quite a gritty tone, and that's with the gain on 12 o'clock, so that can go up to real high gain territory. And that's something that I really quite like myself, although depending on what band I'm playing with, I might use it with significantly less gain, or I might use it with a bit more, but with some of the features that we'll show you later. So, back to that channel, I'll start playing around with the bass and treble and the gain before we talk about the mids. So at that kind of gain level, you really do start to hear what's going on. It's really pushing that 12AX7 and you're getting quite a lot of top end out of it. But what you can then do is there's this mid control with a sweep. So this is what's called semi-parametric. I'll just hold this up to the camera. So it's got a mid and a sweep. And what they do is the mid is what you would expect, except that the sweep moves around where that mid is. So if I just crank the mids all the way, I'll start playing an A note with one hand and moving that sweep around with the other hand, and hopefully you'll hear how it becomes more low mid tubby, then kind of high mid, and goes like all the way up to super high mids, and you can really play with that. So it really makes that mid control quite powerful, because maybe you can take out some low mid or add some low mid if you're going for a more vintagey kind of Geezer Butlery kind of drive, or you can add some high mid if you just want some bite, or you can roll off some high mid if you want more of a just a full vintage kind of sound. I don't know, it depends exactly what you're after. But this is where it all gets clever. So let's switch between A and B again. Get two sounds that we like. Okay, so they're not that different from each other now, those two tones, but one's got a lot more drive in it, but the amount of bass matches, you know, the amount of top end roughly matches. I reckon that I could probably do a function gig just with those two channels. But wait, there's more. This is where it gets clever, because when you press both buttons together, you get what's called fusion mode. And there are two completely different fusion modes. So, one thing that you can do is, this is where there's another knob for fusion. So, in the blue mode called cold fusion, what you get there is you get both channels at the same time, but you get some of the clean channel and some of the distorted channel. So the fusion blends in that clean channel back in. So maybe if you wanted a wild, crazy distortion on channel B, and then blend the clean back in so you can hear the clarity and hear what you're doing over the top of that, that's the kind of thing you might go for. Like so. So let's play with that. And then you'll see me play with the fusion knob just to try and get the blend of the two right. Moving the camera down a bit so you might actually be able to see what I'm playing. But yes, Jürgen in chat says, say something for my son, he's a bass player. Hi Jürgen. Keep playing. That's how I got to where I am, is just keep going. And never be afraid to try new things. So, cheers. And yes, so the fusion mode, it's a little bit fuzzy at this point for what I might use it for. But the possibilities are really quite endless. So what I might do is going for more of a kind of, thinking about it this way. So if I went for kind of Flee from the Chili Peppers kind of tone, thinking about it. So what I think he might do is he would have the A channel as his main sound. But then there are some songs like Around the World, for example, where you might get quite a thin, quite heavy distortion, but layer it in with the clean. So let's dial in a really quite aggressive but bass light distortion. That kind of thing. Let's maybe take a little top end off that. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Cold Fusion on, and I'm going to blend that in with that original clean. So that's really good. If I get more of the fusion in maybe and just back the volume off on B channel, I might use this live, so I've got clean and then stomp on them both, and probably not use channel B on its own in that configuration. But that's all depending on how you want to see it. So if I went playing a gig and just suddenly kicked this in, cool, so I've matched the levels very quickly there, very easily. Now, there are other things you can do with this. There's what's called hot fusion. And hot fusion is a really clever, instead of channel A and channel B together, channel A hits channel B as a big boost. So if you're in the kind of band where you want some seriously heavy, seriously fuzzy kind of tones, let's try a completely different setup. So let's try channel B as the main channel, but maybe with a fairly gritty sound, if that's the kind of band that you're going to be in. But then, if I hit both buttons together with the hot fusion button in, so the tube suddenly goes red, then red means big noise is going to happen. So let's get a reasonable sound on B and then just make it crazy by fusioning the A channel in and using it like a boost pedal. And so on and so forth. Although I probably wouldn't use that kind of tone for that song for Hysteria by Muse. I would definitely use a fuzz, but that's by the by. You can get some seriously high gain stuff out of this. Now, what's the next thing I want to talk about is that I'll just move this this drink out of the way and get a kind of a normal sound. Because next, I want to talk about the speaker sim, because there's a couple of buttons on the side I'm going to show you. Move this and put the bass down for a second. Because this is where the clever stuff comes in. So, on this side, oh, man overboard. So on this side we have the input, but we also have the through. So if you want to run this to a completely different set of pedals as well, that's fine. or if you wanted to run this to an amp and run the other side straight to front of house, that works. And none of the stuff that's on the front will affect the through. And then there's send and there's return, which I'll come back to in a minute. There's the output, which is obvious. But there's also the DI output, which is what I'm using today. Come on, camera, focus. You can do this. Do I get gifted these by Greg? Nope, had to buy all these. Yep. So that's the thing. I love Two Notes stuff, but up until this point, they have given me absolutely nothing. Apart from this t-shirt, actually. They gave me this t-shirt, which I'm always grateful of another t-shirt. But, yes, this is all paid for by the studio. How much is it? Can I use it with my Line 6 Sonic Port VX and GarageBand on my iPhone? They are... let me remind myself that it's in the 200s, so it's not super expensive, but it's not super cheap either. But for what it is, I mean, I think it's a pretty good deal. Let's just have a look at La Bass. How much is a La Bass? In England, they're £234. So in the US, they're about $250. Depends where you live. Excuse me. And then, of course, in the US, you got sales tax and all that kind of stuff. And can you use it with a Line 6 Sonic port? Yes, of course you can. This has DI output, which is what I recommend to use if you've got an interface with a mic input. But it's also got a regular guitar line level output, which can be sent to an amp or to an interface that's only got a line in. So, yes, you can use this with pretty much anything. And I'm mostly intending to use this live, although I'm going to use it in the studio quite a lot as well. I've been using a Behringer knockoff of a Sans amp live, and I'm going to try this in place of it. But that's what I'm going to do. So on the side, I was going to talk about the DI output, which is quite loud, and there's something I wish was on there which isn't, is a pad button, but that's okay. And then there's a ground lift, which if I press that, we'll get some horrible buzzing noise. Oh, sorry about that. RIP headphone users. Mop. And there's a button that says speaker sim. Now, up until now, all the sounds that we've had on here have not included the speaker sim. These have all been quite modern bass tones where quite often you won't use a bass cab sound. Dr. Nightgaunt says he got the high gain guitar version, which will be the lead, which we also bought, but I was going to talk about that on another day, off Reverb for under $200. Bargain. So yeah, this the La Bass it's competing with a Sans amp. It's competing with things like the Dark Glass B7K. It's in that world. It's in that kind of, you want a pedal that can do some high gain distortion that's really clear. It's there, but the thing that really sold this for me was the clean sound, because up until very recently with Dark Glass's B7K Ultra, basically you got the gain sound or you didn't use it. You turned the whole thing off. And what I really wanted was this flexibility, because some of my favourite bass tones have been either split, so having clean with some drive over the top, or just clean. And I need that kind of versatility, really. But let's talk about this speaker sim for a minute, because the thing that Two Notes are most famous for is their cabinet modelling. This isn't really cabinet modelling, this is just one of those kind of basic, what do you call it? It's almost like a filter, it's a standby. It sounds decent, but this switch on the side, next to the headphone socket, nearly forgot to mention, this has got a headphone output, so if you want to practice at home and still have like a high gain sound to practice with, then I really, really, really recommend this. Because you can jam away all night with those kind of crushing, distorted tones. Dial in the sound to work with how your fingers work, or if you use a pick, or however you've got that set up. And then you can turn up to practice and then stick the output into an amp and go. And in the meantime, not upset anybody. You know, parents or family or, you know, waking babies or. And because it's got a headphone output, you don't need to use this with an interface in a computer and all that kind of stuff if you're just practicing and you just want to hear how it sounds. You can just plug it in, plug your bass in, plug the headphones in, go. Which, as someone who is incredibly techie, I mean, on my left side, I've got a full like streaming rig. I've got some crazy tech setups in the studio and at home as well. Sometimes all I want to do is plug a sound in, put some headphones on, and just play. And especially when I want to practice something, that can just be so good. This thing's also got MIDI as well, but I'll talk about the MIDI another time because the MIDI's quite clever, but I've not really fully got to grips with that yet. I've not had this pedal very long. So, on with the show. So, I'm going to go back to this clean sound that's really quite bright. And I'm going to turn that on and off, and then I'm going to turn on the speaker sim, and you'll see me push a button on the side. Wonder if they'll release a software version. Maybe. Analog? Yes, this is all analog, Jürgen. Yes, this pedal is entirely analog. There are no digital circuits in this, which is also why the speaker sim in this isn't the best, but that's what in a minute we're going to talk about this white thing up here about. That's the Torpedo CAB. It's currently plugged in, but I'm making an earth loop. Yeah, so the La Bass is entirely analog. It's got a fully 100 plus volt 12AX7 in the signal path. And yeah, so we're going to look at the speaker sim, which that's the reason why the speaker sim in this isn't like absolutely the best, is it's just an analog filter. So let's have a listen. So I'll start with, and then you'll see me push the button on the side, and that'll be me turning on the speaker sim. So that's really quite a difference there between the speaker sim and not the speaker sim. It kind of puts a blanket over the whole sound, but it sounds like apparently a classic vintage 8x10 cabinet with that whole kind of vintagey vibe going on. So if that's the sound you want, if you want a vintage, warm, fat tone, that button does it. Have I played through this long enough to notice a slight change in tone after the tube has had a chance to warm up considerably? No, and honestly, I am not a big believer in that, to be honest, especially in preamp tubes. I don't. But they're built to a specification, and there's a heating element in it. If it's not heated up after 30 seconds, then the heating element's broken. And then that heating element is set on a voltage so that it regulates itself. So, yeah, if that's, if you're noticing a change in tone because the tube's getting too warm, that sounds like a design flaw. So, no, I mean, I don't hear a kind of difference like that. I have noticed that tube microphones behave better having been left to warm up, but generally I find that's because if there's any condensation on the capsule, then the heat from the tube eventually dissipates out and makes that condensation evaporate and sorts out that problem. Is there more than one speaker simulator type built in? No, there isn't. That is very much an extra, I think, on this kind of pedal, especially at this price point. It's definitely an extra. Whereas what we're going to talk about next is the Torpedo CAB. Now, this is where I get to the point that I was going to talk about with the send and return on here, because my first thought was, why would you bother with a send and return on a distortion pedal? Because why wouldn't you just put effects after it? And then it struck me that the send and return goes before the DI output, which then made me go, because if I was playing live in 99 out of 100 circumstances, unless I had like the nicest vintage SVT, or whatever amp on stage, I would probably put the XLR into this DI output and give that to front of house and go, do what you will with this. Which means all my effects, all my setup would have to go before that, which is where I wouldn't want some of my effects to go before the distortion and before the preamp. I would want them to go after the heavy gain, and that's where the send and return comes in. Because then we're treating it like a full amp setup, which is, again, for the way that I think, absolutely brilliant. And one thing you can put after the distortion and everything, if I turn off this speaker sim, is you can put the Torpedo CAB in there and use that as a very versatile speaker simulator after the distortion on La Bass, but before this DI output. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to move over La Bass. We're going to stick the Torpedo CAB in there, and we're going to use the send, which is going to the Torpedo CAB, and we're going to use the return, which is coming from the Torpedo CAB, which I've set at line level. There we go. And so currently, let's have a look. So let's bypass the Torpedo CAB, and then I'm going to turn it on. Helps when you wire it the right way round. Rookie. What an absolute rookie error. You know, you'd think maybe I was some complete noob who didn't run a studio for a living. Anywho, there's the sound. What a complete nitwit. It's not as if I've ever plugged a cable in before. So this is completely bypassed, so the speaker sim off again. Oh, you can hear the clank coming through the vocal microphone up there. So I'm going to turn this on and off. Use the bypass. There we go. So I'm going into the Bass Beast cabinet, which is my Zilla 4x10 with a 421 in front of it. So getting quite specific instead of a cab. So I'm going to turn that on and off on the Torpedo CAB now. So. Something that's interesting to note there is, as well as it suddenly sounding a little less bright, let's go and dive into the edit. You can't really see that on the screen here. I'll see if I can hold that up to the screen, but what is going on is there is a power amp emulation that's been turned on with some gain on a set of 6L6s. So that is really pushing a power amp emulation in the Torpedo CAB. And then I've got my 421, which is right in the middle. Position front, EQ on, mode bass. Yeah, so what I could do here is I could EQ down a little mids and bring out a little brightness. Let's see how that sounds. So the torpedo cab's making a big difference. So I was playing around with the EQ there. It's quite hard to see. Let's see if I can get... Yeah, there we go. So if I really hold it up, you can kind of see on screen there that I'm using the bass beast. If I hold down that A button there, it bypasses it. But that's just really interesting to me that that's something you can do, is you can put something like a torpedo cab in the effects loop of the La bass, which is the real focus of this video. I'm going to do a completely different torpedo cab video at another point. I just wanted to prove that that's a thing. Also, let's just quickly let's get out of these how do I get out of this menu? That's the mute. I can also, there it is, I've loaded a classic impulse response. So that is one of the Redwire's old SVT impulses with what looks like an AKG D112 on the cap. Yeah, I can see, yeah, D112 cap, 0.5 inches. So let's have a listen to this on and off compared to the speaker simulation. So I'll try and move that around so you can see them both. There we go. So there's quite a distinct difference, but the fact that the torpedo cab's a lot more versatile is one thing. They're significantly more expensive. I think it's €450 just for the torpedo cab, but that's a serious piece of digital technology where the La bass is a, technically speaking, more simple analog preamp. So I'm really starting to warm to the La bass. I mean, I thought I would. The choices, I mean, I've played a Dark Glass B7K before. There's actually a review of that on my channel. I quite like the sound, and it was fairly versatile because of the 4-band EQ. But the 2-band EQ and the 3-band sweepable on this really make it a lot more versatile. And because it does clean and distortion and both all in one unit, I think this is going to become my go-to. And like I said, I've paid for this. This isn't a freebie, so I really have no need to rave about this. Honestly, I just think it's great so far. And this is still kind of getting to grips with this. I've only had this a week, really. But I'm really excited to see what I can do with this on albums. I might use it as a distortion box in front of real amps in some cases. I might use it on pop records as the clean tone. I might use it on like progressive metal stuff as the really gritty in your face distortion. Use the DI output, but also use the through to go to an amp for a clean sound maybe. The possibilities are all there. If anyone's got any more questions, I'm not planning on this being a super long stream. So yeah, ask away. What else is there to talk about on this? I mean, there's the ground lift, which is useful if you're in a place that's got bad ground, but we talked about that. If I... Oh, yeah, let's not do that again. Ah, idiot. Sorry about that. But yeah, the fact that there's a send and return means that I could have maybe a drive pedal and a tuner pedal going into the bass, then have a send going to a chorus and a delay, maybe a reverb, going back to the return before that goes to the DI output to front of house. So they get one cable, they get all of your effects, all in the right order with a relatively minimalistic pedal board setup. So yeah, I'm very excited to try this on some albums. So yeah, if there are no more questions, then ladies and gentlemen, I will bid you adieu. Because it's Friday night, and this is apparently what I do on my Friday nights, rock and roll. It's 9:45 here in UK land, and it's pretty much time for me to finish this whiskey and then get hot cocoa or something and get an early night because there's a lot to do tomorrow. I've just filmed a video with a small company called Flatley Pedals. The head honcho there, Paul Flatley, is a fantastic guy. And we just did an extensive video looking at all of his bass effects, which would be really interesting to have demoed with La Bass, but alas, that was not to be. But if I got one of his compressors, which he's going to send me, I would probably put that in front of the gain staging. I might put it afterwards, actually, in the send and return loop. But then I personally would definitely put a chorus in the send and return rather than going into the drive, because that's my idea of a tone most of the time. But there's a lot to do on this board. So yeah, no more questions. Thank you everybody, and look forward to seeing you in the next live video. There's going to be a video on Monday from me and Filthy Amplification talking about all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff to do with amp design, which I find fascinating. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.